So we launched at $100 a month and we quickly dropped it to $50 a month. There's a whole other backstory behind the name. Basically, we bought the domain. We had huge fights, like almost fist fights. And that whole thing of Silicon Valley, US talent, hyper specialized versus New Zealand is very, very generalist. So you did actually need to hire up a big team. Where all of that is now just kind of off the shelf, easy and much better than you could build. Upstock has absolutely changed an industry. Xero absolutely changed an industry. So, I think that is a pretty intense, my job as a designer to design interfaces and workflows. Some of the things I think about are, as a designer, I want to design my interface to your product.
This is Mark Pavlyukovskyy, and welcome to the TechMates podcast, where my partner Hendrik and I explore how Kiwi and Aussie founders are reshaping the future and what sets them apart. Hendrik and I have been part of successful companies in Silicon Valley and Europe, and now bring that expertise to partner with entrepreneurs in Australasia. By sharing the personal stories of successful Kiwi and Aussie founders and how they got here, we hope to inspire you to dream big. This is TechMates, bringing an outsider's perspective to the stories of those daring to disrupt down under. Let's dive in.
That experience convinced Rod and the team that they had to build the first thing, that you guys should build the first thing?
When we launched, it was more of a bank reconciliation platform than an accounting platform. We didn't have some core accounting functionality. So accountants were much more skeptical and resistant to it. There were a few accountants that were, on board from the get-go, and they were like, this is the future. The majority, they're conservative by nature, and they were just like, you guys are fucking joking. You've got to be kidding. This is never going to fly. And so we had to win. The first customers we won were those people in that user test. They literally became our first customers from that user testing.
Wow.
And so...
Did they pay you $150 a month or however much?
No. So we launched at $100 a month, and we quickly dropped it to $50 a month. Again, because what we shipped was not an accounting platform. It missed so many core features. And then the other side of that was, within a couple months of launching, we IPO'd the business. So that was another radical. So within a year of founding, we went public.
Why? What was the reason behind it?
Yeah. So, New Zealand is the reason. And that is that there was no VC community here.
Oh, so to raise money.
You guys weren't around. Really was kind of the only path. Like, we weren't going to raise money from Silicon Valley VCs. The only startup in this rock at the bottom of the world. That was never going to happen. And going public was really kind of the only way to make money. There was another factor there too, was that Rod had a reputation for flipping businesses that you build and then sell it off. And so he wanted to make it clear that this is, a long-term, this is not a, fly by night kind of business. And so that was a whole other trip, building that or going public and being a public company.
Which revenue did you have at that point?
It was friends and family and random people that we could, that we had almost no revenue. It was like in the thousands.
Thousands of dollars a year.
Yeah. So it was like angel funding these days. Like, so we had, enough revenue to say we had revenue, but it wasn't, of any material.
Wow.
You couldn't do any multiple projections based off of it.
So then what happened? So you IPO, how was that process and what happened after?
Yeah. So it was fascinating, like New Zealand, it was very risky, certainly, and so it had advantages and disadvantages. An enormous advantage that I don't think we really calculated was that, and we did calculate it, but we saw it as a negative when we were prepared for a negative. First of all, we were called Xero. There's a whole other backstory behind the name, but
what is the backstory behind the name? Quickly.
It's basically we bought the domain. We had huge fights, like almost fist fights. Rod originally wanted to call it Accounting 2.0, and there's a million reasons why that was a bad idea. So we got into, pretty gnarly fighting matches or screaming matches over it. And then we eventually landed on Xero. Like, I think nobody is disappointed that we made that choice. And so going public, the thing that we were freaked out about with a name like Xero was...
But it was going to zero?
Yeah, the headlines write themselves. Like, this company has gone to zero. They're worth zero. And so we actually anticipated that, and we're kind of, all right, like, how do we spin this, or how do we, if we get that kind of press, what do we do about it? What we didn't anticipate, though, was because we're a public company, we get free press constantly. Like anytime we do anything, we're a PR machine. And so PR was actually enormously valuable to the success of Xero, and Twitter was as well, social media, but in particular Twitter. So Twitter launched exactly when we did. And so people were just publicly proclaiming their love, word of mouth on Twitter about Xero just spread like wildfire. And the combination of that press was, incredibly valuable. And Rod was a PR master. And so he could insert himself into any conversation and turn it, it was a conversation about the economy or a conversation about education, and he'd just turn it into a Xero oriented topic. But the risk and the downside was that, there's that tall poppy syndrome is a real thing. And so there were a lot of people that were like, these guys, who the fuck do they think they are, looking for any reason to, take us down and smear us. But we, fortunately, I think overall, there was just a huge amount of enthusiasm for what we're doing that is right off the back of Trade Me selling. And so that was all of a sudden tech in New Zealand was, hey, this is a real thing. And, there's an opportunity here. So I think that there was enthusiasm in the country for technology and around, so again, all of a sudden IPOs in the US were, it lined up when the .com, the SaaS and Web 2.0 emergence happened. So it was.
Phil, can I quickly ask? So part of the reason why we're doing the podcast is try to dispel this notion of the tall poppy a little bit and get Kiwis exciting, Aussies excited about building and creating, and see that as a very exciting, career path they could do. Why do you think that exists from your experience? What drives that tall poppy thing?
Interestingly, we talked earlier about egalitarianism, and I think it stems a bit from that, like that, hey, don't get ahead of everyone else. And that, and I do think, when you look at cultures around the world, and the US is kind of the poster child for the braggadocious, kind of very pushy and self-absorbed entrepreneur. In particular, I think it's just in the Kiwi culture to be, and because we're a small nation, a really small nation that has to be dependent on each other. We don't have kind of big trading partners or we don't have neighbors a flight away.
Yeah.
And so we really have to be kind of self-reliant. And I think that does that all that background kind of makes it more conducive to like, let's be in this together. It is, like you can kind of see it the reverse, like that it's necessarily negative, it's a positive, and like, but I think that pulling people down is obviously not a positive. But, it's interesting. Like that was the first time I really experienced like firsthand tall poppy syndrome. But again, I think Xero was a darling.
How did you experience it? Like, would people just telling you like, hey, like you shouldn't be trying to make this thing so big or so successful? Or
yeah, I think there was this, and it was more, Kiwis are polite, so it wasn't like this direct assault. It was more like, I don't think this is going to work. And like, again, who do you think you are going up against MYOB and Intuit and Sage? And, like it was more like that, like, who do you think you are? And then also, but, so there was I remember there was like a bulletin board or whatever, a forum. There was a SharePoint or something like that. There was people that were, discussing the Xero share price. And that's where I saw it get really ugly. Because again, everyone can be the warrior, keyboard warrior and vent their vitriol. And so, I would see that there quite a bit. Like, this is they're scammers. It's a scam, and, it's a ripoff, but again, by and large, the majority of people were supportive of it. And, overall, we got amazing support. And, it was enormously risky. It was enormously risky. And there was a lot of, points where it was teetering and it wasn't a sure bet.
So you went public and started getting traction to the Twitter, word of mouth. And what's sort of the next pivotal point? Because I know that at some point, did you guys list in Australia, and then didn't Peter Thiel get involved or something?
Well, the first one was, it was one of these moments where the business was struggling. And if it weren't for Craig Winkler, who was the founder of MYOB, he'd been pushed out of MYOB by private equity. So it was a hostile takeover and he was pushed out. So he plowed all his money into Xero. He took his MYOB, exit money and he put it into Xero. And so that was just really fortuitous for us. Both
was he a Kiwi or where was he from?
No, he's an Aussie. So it was an Aussie company. And it was, again, a darling, early tech pioneer, poster child for tech in Australia. And so he saw what we were doing.
He did that as like revenge because he didn't like what happened.
I assume that is a factor no matter what.
Right.
But, I think that he saw the vision that we had and he realized actually this is the future, that we haven't really, they've leapfrogged MYOB and that they're executing it extraordinarily well. And so he put in, I think it was 19 million. We did around at $20 million. We were already public. And he invested somewhere in the vicinity of 19 million, which was, a game changer again for us. And that also put us on the map in Australia in a big way. So that was a huge endorsement. That made huge headlines. That was absolutely massive. And so that was getting into Australia and winning Australia was a challenge. There was lots of, getting into any new market is a challenge. And we first tried the UK and the culture there was just even more in the dark ages about technology and the resistance to technology. And Australia was much more aligned to New Zealand, like embracing technology and looking for new technology. And then later on, I was a big proponent of going into the US. Again, I had my own little revenge that I wanted to prove that we could do something out of New Zealand that and take over the world and take down Intuit. But my view of it was that we do it much more guerrilla. But as soon as we got Peter Thiel on board, then it was like, no. The playbook in the US is take over Super Bowl ads. This is how you do the US. You do it big or you go home. And that just did not align with our strategy and our playbook and the way we, won markets. We had a very guerrilla approach and a very grassroots approach. And so, that there was definitely a culture clash when we went into the US about the strategy about winning the US. And then, we did poke the bear, put a billboard on the 101 that said, fuck you into it. Politer words than that, but not much politer. And so that immediately, we are now all of a sudden enemy number one, and they put all their resources and they had, their resources were many, many, many times our resources. And so, they made it hard, but we also, again, I think that the advice we got and the approach we took was this kind of go big or go home. Up until that point, we were already in the US and we were getting good traction. But as soon as we basically, and we took the Silicon Valley script, you hire a big team. And this was when you measured the success of a company by the size of the team. And it was just fucking ludicrous. The salaries were insane. And then another thing was that, again, that whole thing of Silicon Valley, US talent, hyper specialized versus New Zealand is very, very generalist. So I could find designers that could code, no problem. In the US, it was few and far between. It was extraordinarily hard. And in general, there's just this hyper specialization and this kind of prima donna attitude. Like I only do, a subset of, I only do CSS optimization. If you want to talk to me about any scripting or any blah, 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 I'm not the guy and fuck off. And that's literally a conversation we had with some of the engineers in the US. And so, there definitely was a culture clash there. And, that strategy of, trying to take dominance and take over the US all at once was, it backfired.
What did you learn from all this as you were kind of building? I mean, you started off just as the designer of the product and an department, and then sort of growing this, getting much larger. And I assume the team's growing, international. What were your personal kind of learnings about culture, how to build out of New Zealand?
Yeah, great question. So it was interesting when we started the business, my role model and the template for me was 37 Signals. So they were
Jason Fried.
Yeah. And so I'd, been a huge fan of theirs. And right when we started Xero, they released their first book, Getting Real. And that was my Bible. And so I think at the time they were a 30-person company. And that was my vision of what we were building with Xero, and we were 30 people within 6 months. So, we were clearly on a different trajectory, and, Rod's kind of strategy and approach was, again, bigger is better. And I think that was actually right for a lot of interesting reasons, that there was no infrastructure technology. There was no payment gateways. There was no payment technology or, internal admin systems. There was no billing systems. You had to build it all yourself. So you did actually need to hire up a big team, where all of that is now just kind of off the shelf, easy and much better than you could build. So that was, an interesting learning. And about one of our first hires was a salesperson, and that, again, I was like, we're an online business. This is all going to be inbound and online. And, realizing the importance and value of having salespeople and having really good salespeople, and how useful that is as a designer to have that connection insight from the front lines.
Did you feel like salespeople sort of, if done right, can also be sort of product designers? Because they're actually doing product research, right?
Yes. And so some of our early salespeople and early support people became product managers, because they had that insight into both the customers and the product that a lot of people didn't have that degree of insight, and that contact, that real direct contact. And so that was another thing. It was like growing from within. That I was a huge advocate of growing from within and nurturing talent rather than bringing talent from outside. And in my later years, before I left, that was a factor in me leaving, is we kept hiring these execs from outside that came from big, established companies, and their whole MO was like a big established company, and it just is not entrepreneurial. It was not scrappy. It was, where's my budget for, throwing money around and for class fights and for, and that they would measure their success, their performance metric was how many reports did they have. They're obsessed about how many reports do I get. It's like, that is not a metric for our business. That is not a metric for running, building something great. And then, that scrappiness and the value of PR, the value of grassroots, building that kind of the culture, the community, and I think that the design strategy and the design approach was really foundational to that. Like, you spend time with your customers and you're a therapist to them. Basically, you listen to their problems, and you want to hear all their problems. Let them unload on you, rather than pushing onto them like, hey, we've got a solution, you're going to love it. It's like, tell me all your problems and let's work together on a solution. And then, scaling, like, so a mantra that Rod had that, I'd never heard before, and that, helped me flip the script on, we're building a 37 Signal scale company to we're building a Google scale company, is that you need to hire your replacement. And I'd never heard that. It took me a little while to just kind of wrap my head around what that means. But then pretty quickly I was like, oh, I get it. Like, I do need to replace myself, like find somebody that's going to take over my role. And so that I went from leading design and being, very hands on the tools, to then building a design team and building the team in general. So I was, responsible for hiring, the majority of the first couple hundred people. And then, how do you transplant your culture into new office? So, all of a sudden we're growing offices, not just in New Zealand, but around the world. And so to me, it was about DNA splicing. So we have to take people from our team that know our culture and put them in country to really set the standard, and to be able to communicate back to the mothership and be able to translate, here's what we're seeing out here. Here's how it's different. Here's how it's the same. Rather than, just bringing in people that are strangers and, have no insight into that kind of how we built the market, how we built the platform, what our strategy has been.
Was there a tipping point in terms of team size, where it switched from kind of being sort of scrappy and, very sort of design led to being more corporate and all about budgets and all about just,
Yeah. So that was what led to me leaving. Was we became much less about, we became a hiring company. So we went from 300 people, and it was already But 300 people, we were really massive growing. And then the following year we grew to 600 people. And then the following year we grew to 1,200 people. And that's when I was like, all I do is spend my time hiring, and the quality of the people we're hiring is not up to our standards. And just to be able to absorb that many people that quickly, and and align them both in terms of the product and the technology but also more importantly the culture. And so there's just so much friction that we introduced into the business by growing that.
Why do you think, like, looking back, do you think that was the right approach, or do you think like the 37 signals kind of approach, keeping it like lean and scrappy, would have been better? Like, kind of what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that, when we got to the level of around 300 people, again, at that stage, these days, you wouldn't need to get up to 300 people to, you can, you don't need the infrastructure, or you need the infrastructure, but you don't need to build it yourself. And so we got up to this level that we kind of had and it was a bit of a plateau for the business, where you all of a sudden get into that, like, how do we expand? How do we, keep the growth curve going? And what is it? Is it product? Is it territories? Is it, do we acquire? Do we go through acquisition? So all of a sudden growing into that level of business. One of the things that I think was really problematic is that we became a feature factory. The Microsoft playbook, more features is better. Word has 1,000 features, and it's like, or I was much more aligned to the Apple philosophy that one of my favorite quotes is from Apple: 1,000 no's for every yes. Then you say no to most things, and we were doing the opposite. We were just like, yes, and do that, and like somebody would have a conversation at a barbecue, somebody would suggest an idea, and all of a sudden we had to drop tools and do this and do that. It really, but having said that, the business has been phenomenally successful still. And so, I do think that we laid the foundation for what it is today, but it's obviously done extraordinarily well and continues to do extraordinarily well. So it's not how I would have done it. Like, again, it's not how I would have gone into the US, not how I would have built a team. I would have been much more focused.
So when you left, was the idea, did you leave with the idea of already kind of building something new and starting from scratch and kind of, calling the shots more on how you're building and scaling a team?
So you asked about success metrics, and then I'll, go into, segue into Upstock, because we've been talking for a long time. So with success metrics, unfortunately, it really was about, it was obviously customer numbers and revenues. But I think internally the culture was, how much are we shipping? It was like shipping. So it was quantity of software, not quality of software. It really shifted. It was, the teams that could ship the fastest and ship the most were rewarded. It wasn't whether it was actually an impactful functionality. And so we also had these conferences. And so a lot of functionality was built to go on stage, and it wasn't built for customer needs. It was built for, show, for PR and to get an applause at a show. And, a lot of that functionality, I think, caused, Rod did talk about, in our early days, he was like, we're a speedboat and all our competitors are these tankers, and we can zip around them. And I kept thinking, why are we building a tanker then? Because, we're building giant, multi-thousand person team, and we're racing to build the most software. And that means that it's just this dead weight. Another expression Rod borrowed from Peter Blake was, does it make the boat go faster? You cannot have dead weight on the boat. Like, you have to be as light, as nimble as possible. But at a certain point, we just kept features. And so those, when I left, those were the KPIs. And again, they were not aligned to my values. So that was time for me to leave. And so, yes, I left, and, I was like pretty toasted after that. I had some pretty severe burnout and PTSD unexpectedly. Like, I thought, I might have a couple months where I need to, chill out. But actually it took a couple years to really work through it. In those years, I was, I was doing I'm kind of an active, I can't sit still. So I was building an app and I learned to build, I coded an iOS app that was extremely fun. And then I was also doing advisory work and investing in a bunch of startups. And that was really fun. And that's what led to Upstock. So a friend of mine owns Fox and Fizz, which is an iconic Kiwi soft drink brand. And he came to me saying that, he has this awful problem with wholesale customers, that they ring him in the middle of the night because that's when their shifts end and they have to restock, or they text him and it's all garbled and he forgets to write down the orders, and his team doesn't get the orders because they have no system in place. And so it's just absolute chaos, and it's causing a lot of friction with his customers and in the business, and it's expensive. They ship the wrong things and they have to do reshipments, and it's all they wear all those costs. And so he hired a dev agency to build him some software, and that transformed his business. And that's when he came to me and he's like, I've got customers that are wanting to use my software. I think I'm onto something here. I'd love to know what you think, and how would you do it? How would you build it? And unlike the companies I was advising at that point were all tech companies with tech founders. So I could just shortcut and say, hey, do this, do that. And they would have their team go away and they would do stuff. And, I was much more of a pure advisory role, where in this case, he wasn't a tech founder. So I actually had to get my hands dirty and get on tools and go meet with customers. And so all of a sudden I was like, wow, this is actually fun. I forgot how fun this is. This is like, I just couldn't get enough of it. Like, meeting customers was just getting me real high, and being on the tools. So it was all of a sudden new tools. There's Figma now. And I was like, these are fun tools. And
did you find that you could move faster because of the new tools?
Yes, for sure. Yeah, for sure. So many ways. Like, like I said, we could build infrastructure. I couldn't believe how fast we could move. It was insane. And so, the couple of things became obvious to me, after that, those first couple of conversations with Matt from Fox and Fizz and with customers. One was that this is inevitable. 100% this is all going digital. It was all on scraps of paper and spreadsheets and emails. There's no way this is sustainable. And once, a digital solution arrives, and I was like, this is insane. This is basically like e-commerce or inventory software. You probably just didn't find it. Let me Google some stuff and I'll find something for you. And that I was just stunned, and there was nothing. It was just garbage. So there was some like inventory systems that had like a bolt-on afterthought that had some of this functionality. And e-commerce was well established, but only for retail. So retail e-commerce was ubiquitous and, a well-solved problem. But B2B was just, it could have been the 80s or 90s with just ancient technology and workflows.
When you say B2B, you mean like buying in bulk, right?
Yes, wholesale. So business buying from a business. I order, in the case of food and beverage, I'm a restaurant and I order bread, so a day's worth or a week's worth of, day. In the case of bread, it's fresh. So a day's worth of bread, and then coffee, I'll, order a couple of days worth of coffee, and eggs, again, relatively fresh, but then other ingredients, are shelf stable. And so sodas, for instance, drinks, in the case of Fox and Fizz, that I order maybe once a week, I'll place an order. And so, and that was the other thing. It was like, I was learning about this whole new world that I did a stint in hospitality when I was a kid, but nothing since. And these were brands that I loved. These were like, my favorite brands of coffee and sodas and food. And so it was a pleasure going to meet with them and talk with them and spend time with them. And it was tragedy to hear that they're, and they were fine with it. They were like, oh yeah, no, what could be easier? I get a phone call and I write it down on the scrap of paper. And it's like, because then you have to type it into a spreadsheet and then you have to into a voice. So like on the surface, it seemed really easy. And then I was like, okay, so I just spent an hour with you watching you work, and you made an error on that one. As I watched you, you wrote down the wrong address, you wrote down the wrong customer, you wrote down the wrong amount. Like there was hardly a transaction that they didn't write down something wrong. And that's all friction, that's all waste. And the amount of time, again, they don't really factor in how much time they're spending doing these things. And the same thing on the hospitality side and the supermarket side, that they're manually writing these things down, and then they don't know who ordered what. They have no visibility. So they'll double order things, or they'll, even worse is when they don't order anything and then they have to run out the next morning. They panic, realize we didn't order any eggs. They have to go to the supermarket, pay a double, triple because they're paying retail prices. And so it's just, just a kind of obscene waste everywhere. Waste of people's time, waste of money, and waste of food miles, waste of food product. And so it seemed like a really, really, like it's needed. It's desperately needed. And I confirm this is a global problem. And I even confirm that it's not just in food and beverage. It's all entirely across B2B. So, where I got my hair done, the woman who runs that, Sable, the salon is called Sable, and she had built this online empire of, hair products and beauty products. And so I asked her to show me how she operates. She had one of the most sophisticated small business operations, most digital, efficient. I couldn't believe how, streamlined and sophisticated they were operating. And I was like, okay, so now show me, how do you order all your products in? And she got a pad of paper and she said, I walk over to the shelf and I write it down. I was like, okay, this is everywhere. Everything is digitized except for this one bit of your business. Right. And so that's when we got started. And so, we were very quickly able to build an MVP. And
so you didn't use what your friend built at Fox and Fizz?
No. So that and that was a strategic decision. We realized that, it was a good prototype, but it was not a scalable platform. Like, it wasn't built to be scaled into, it didn't have like an API, microservices architecture. There's real fundamentals that it didn't have. Yeah. And also the user experience was functional, not beautiful and not simple enough.
On that point, right, of like the design kind of centric, like, I mean, hospitality is a pretty entrenched industry, right? How was it getting these stores and these owners to adopt a new way of doing things? Like, was that hard?
It definitely is. And so one of the things, so this was one of my key metrics I had to design something that was faster than writing down on a piece of paper. So that's the benchmark. Like, I can, get a text in and write it down on a piece of paper. Cool. I want to make that happen with a click of a button. So all you do is click a button and the software does the rest. And so that was, I think a proof point that we had to make is that this is way faster than, what you think it couldn't be faster than scribbling a note down. Well, here it is. But yes, it is an entrenched, hospitality in particular is quite entrenched. And so, and it's interesting, like, again, there's two different cultures. There's back of house and front of house. And there are very, very different, mindsets, and where the kitchen back of house is very spontaneous, to put it politely, panic. If you've seen The Bear, the chefs I've talked to have said, that is not at all an exaggeration, that it is as, insane and intense and chaotic as the show makes it out to be. And then, front of house is much more organized, much more streamlined. It's also a difference between fresh and packaged goods. Packaged goods are just much more kind of predictable and reliable, and you don't have the concerns about perishables. So, but yes, there's also a cultural mindset that kind of aligns to those two functions. And, it's interesting. So we launched when COVID launched. So just like Xero, the first user test that I ever did was our first customer. So we got our first customer the week we launched. They already had been user testing the product. And so it was a no-brainer for them. That was Six Barrel Soda. And we were going up against a competitor. There was an Australian competitor that, had suddenly come out of nowhere. And so that was awesome to win. And they were, a much more mature platform than we were. And then, COVID, hit, and that obviously disrupted the entire world, and particularly hospitality, really. And so we had to really, adjust to that. But in some ways, worked to our advantage, because digital became all of a sudden top of everyone's mind. And it was no longer like, should we go digital? It's like, like, I can work remotely. And so I don't need to be there on site. And, all of a sudden there was this kind of embrace in hospitality in particular of digital technology. And then, and I think along with that was just like that kind of operationalizing and operational mindset, was more accepted, similar to anything. You have to win those early customers one by one. And, and it was humbling. I'd had a big exit with Xero, but here I am back in the trenches, hand to hand, getting customer over the line and, begging for their time and for, hey, can I just ask you a couple questions?
So do you not feel at any point like that's like below your kind of like dignity or whatever, like doing that?
There was a couple moments where I was like, kind of what
am I doing?
Yeah, like I don't need to do this. Why am I doing this? But they're offset by all the thrill of working with these people. And like, I know how to build this software. I can make all these problems go away. And the magic of creating something from nothing. And then also the magic of working with a team. Like we got to pick the best talent from Xero and, handpick who we wanted to work with. And that collaboration, I really, really miss that collaboration. So it's that the combination of building something from nothing, really doing something at scale that has impact, like this is changing people's lives. Like that, I think there's no greater feeling than realizing that this is changed an industry. Upstock has absolutely changed an industry. Xero absolutely changed an industry. So, I think that is a pretty intensely amazing, gratifying feeling. And also, the other thing is I'm young. Like, what am I just going to sit by the pool today?
And what's the advantages of being a second-time founder? Like, you sounds like you got, have a reputation. You can hire the best folks. A lot of people know you. What are there any disadvantages? Any other advantages that?
Yeah, I mean, well, definitely the advantages. Like, we knew, we could get started much faster than somebody who's a first timer. And both because, we kind of know the drill, we know the people, and we have, really, really strong networks, and we have a really strong reputation. So, that all those things help a lot. And we also knew what we didn't want. So, we were both, so Duncan Ritchie, my co-founder, he was chief platform officer at Xero, and he and I worked really closely together, and we had a great working relationship. And so, he was the first person I approached about, looping into this, first to get his advice. Like, do you think this is a real thing? And do you think it's big? And then if so, do you want to, be involved? And the answer was yes to all of those quickly. So that was good. And then, we were aligned on that mindset that it's not about how many people you hire. Building the biggest team is not the key to success. That the key to success, it's actually the opposite in my view, is that, being as lean as possible and doing the least amount of work, the least amount of features for the biggest impact. And so that was another thing that we went into it, was really writing our manifesto from the beginning. So even before I talked about that user research that we did, at Xero, and that was defining for what we did with Xero. What we didn't do was that kind of culture, like what is it that we actually want to build in terms of a business, in terms of a culture, in terms of and so doing that with Upstock, I'd been advising enough startups and giving them exactly that advice. So actually that was another advantage, is like I had all this advice I'd given other people and I could easily take it myself. And so, another book that I read around that time was Derek Sivers' Anything You Want. And, the basic idea, it's a really quick read and a really good, fun read. Again, I hate business books, but it's one of the few that I'd recommend. And the idea is that you're building a universe. So like when you build a company, you're building a universe and you get to write all the rules. And so do it intentionally. Don't let it happen to you. Make sure that you actually have a vision and write that vision down and talk about that vision and make sure that you get people that are aligned to that vision. And I think that that's more and more common these days. But at the time, that still wasn't too common. Whenever I would talk to startups about like, before you do anything, do your values, it'd be like, that's for big, stupid corporate companies. I was like, no, actually, it's kind of your blueprint for your for your business. Uh-huh. And it's interesting. We're now at a phase of Upstock where, we're kind of in that, okay, what's the next mountain top that, we've kind of hit a few key milestones. And interestingly, like we have, up until now, it's been really clear. The path has been really, really obvious and it's really what sequence do we do these things in? Uh-huh. Now we're, in this fortunate, but also, it has its challenges stage where we're like, okay, there's 10 doors in front of us and each one of them is a kind of a trajectory that, sets us on a path. Uh-huh. And one of those do we do? And we're going through that process now and, coming back to the values, like, all right, our values will tell us the answer. And that's been really like, because we've started the process and then I was like, hang on, we actually have the answers. We've already done this exercise And it's not like the values are static and they never change. They have changed. And, this is another good opportunity to update them and revise them. So it's a living document and a living strategy.
Maybe can you talk us through where the business is at the moment and kind of, you have 10 different options of growing the business, but where do you see the business in like the next 3 to 5 years?
Yeah. So we're the dominant platform by, there basically really isn't much competition at all and we have, the largest market share and category leader, all the things you want. And then in Australia, that's growing very, very rapidly. So we entered Australia a while ago, like a year and a half ago, let's say. And that's now 30% of our business and growing, that's the fastest segment of our business. We have customers in the US and, again, a learning from our Xero days is, the US is not a country that you just, take approach as a single entity, that you really have to, again, it's guerrilla. Our approach and our mindset about it is guerrilla. We want to, and similar to what we did in Australia, we're like testing before we invest. And so we've got early customers and we're working through that, but we're not looking to scale that until we've proven out a few things and, de-risked a few things. And we think that we have, when I started this business, I mentioned that, I couldn't find any competitors. Now I track nearly 350 competitors globally, and they're of all shapes and sizes, and not all of them are direct. Most of them are indirect in some way. They overlap and have some functionality that we offer. But, there's no shortage of direct competitors either. And, the good thing about, observing that is seeing the things that we do really uniquely and that nobody else in the world is doing, and that, playing to our strengths. And so that, as we go forward, looking at that, that definitely is going to help point to the doors that we go down, or those spaces where we play to our strengths and that we have a strategic advantage over, an unfair advantage over our competitors. And also, that there's these opportunities that nobody else is looking at, and nobody really, this was another learning from Xero, was when we did the bank reconciliation, Intuit, I found out years later, had reverse engineered and realized that was our defining killer feature. Uh-huh. I knew MYOB figured it out very quickly because they knocked it off immediately. I don't know if you've ever heard of the term of cargo cult. So they did their cargo cult version of our, bank rec. It looked like it on the surface, didn't do anything. It didn't actually function like it. So I wrote up this blog post at Xero that.
Philip, just quickly on the cargo cult. Do you want to just quickly explain it, or I can explain just?
Yeah. So during World War II, the U.S. set up bases in, I think it was Papua New Guinea or Samoa. Maybe it was Samoa, one of those islands. The Pacific Islands. And the islanders were just enthralled with all this magic that came out of the sky, these airplanes and all this, equipment and all this food,
a lot of food
and the goods that came with it. And then, the Army left and the U.S. left, and they were like, well, the taps run out. Like, where the hell's, so they built planes, these out of bamboo. They simulated planes and they simulated an air control tower and runways and everything, to make it all happen, but it was all fake. None of it worked. And so they were disappointed and confused why, this knockoff actually didn't perform. And that's exactly what MYOB did. And so that's a really important lesson that we took away from Xero, is that, there are certain things that you architect, and from the very, very, very get-go, that are, if not impossible, so we found out Intuit wanted to imitate our bank reconciliation, and they went to their bank engineering team, and their engineering team said, would be a 7-year project. We would have to basically, burn down what we have and start over again. And that they weren't willing to do that. And so that is one of those things. So that even though we have, let's call it dozens of direct competitors, but that's everywhere around the world, Pakistan and Indonesia and everywhere. But still, there's a lot of players. And so to me, in my mind, that proves that there's a huge market and for this. But then also we have a perspective on this, and we have, a opportunity that most people aren't looking at, and they're not looking at it the way we're looking at it. And so, I think another thing that's a bit different about what we're doing to what we did with Xero is that we're willing to take a bit of more of a long game approach. So it's not about ramp up as fast as possible. And, that again, Rod was famous for saying that the fast eat the slow. I think that there is, that doing something that's more thoughtfully and taken with a longer view can also be enormously successful at a massive scale, and that it doesn't have to be kind of the standard Silicon playbook, hire up as fast as you can and burn through your money as fast as you can. That we want to do things more intentionally, and it's risky. That definitely has its that less people are comfortable with. All right, we're taking the long game here, and we're doing something that has more that's not a cookie cutter of all the others, is innovative, but again, that's kind of risky. But for my money, it's been phenomenally wildly. It's the things that we're doing have built an absolute moat for us, and so so far so good, and I'm really happy, and we've hit some really important milestones, and long may it last.
I mean, I think what got me excited about your business was that you fundamentally have network effects built into the core, and they're so strong and deep. And I just it's like you can see that from your churn data, right? Like no one's churning. It's like once you got a business using it and it simplifies the process, they eliminate some staff because it's automatic. It's just like, well, this is like you build your business around Upstock, right? It sort of becomes your differentiator. Maybe it becomes part of your identity as a business, that like we are innovative. We use this thing that just like, and now I'm curious how you see the future of this, right? Future of Upstock, but also
on that, just want to, that's a really good point, that like what we're seeing now is that our customers are looking at their other systems and saying, if it doesn't work with Upstock, we're not, going to use that inventory system, or we're not going to use this other system, the courier system. They're building around Upstock, which is really amazing. And then the other thing that very reminiscent of the Xero days was the kind of cult-like fanaticism that we have. Our customers just are absolutely smitten. And again, it is that like, I just click a button and it magically does all these things for me. And that light bulb moment where they switch from like, I just thought this was just, another app and now this is just, changed my entire life, changed my business. And again, that is what why you do these things, is to get that kind of response from people is magic. So yes, you were going to ask about the future.
Well, yeah. And now it's like with AI things, you shouldn't even need to click a button, right? It should actually just happen automatically. How do you see the future of Upstock, but also just the industry in general of design? How do you see that given what we've seen with Gen AI now?
Yeah. I mean, I definitely keep coming personally, like that voice interfaces now are much more viable. I mean, I still struggle with the voice interactions that I have. Like, it's not 100%. And so I think that that's similar to AI is, it's still not 100%. So, there are people out there that have deployed AI in a way. We have a competitor that has kind of just been chasing some functionality. We just released some AI functionality last year, and they've knocked it off. But they're doing it in a way that is screwing people up, is screwing up their customers. And again, we've been very, very thoughtful about how it's not just like AI does everything for you, that you have to be thoughtful about it. And we haven't deployed it in a way that's like, here's the AI, push the AI button, which you've seen in, every kind of app has like, here's the magic wand button. You don't even know in Upstock that you're using AI. And that to me is the sign of great design and great technology, is that you don't even know you're using it. It just magically happens. So I definitely, that is the future. And it does feel like what I'm interested in platforms like ours, like how much of an interface is there? My job as a designer to design interfaces and workflows. So some of the things I think about are, as a designer, I want to design my interface to your product. Like, fuck your stupid interface. Like my car, going back to dashboards, right? Like these hideous cybery, every has to have a million lights on it, a million functions on it, and they're never the functions you want in the places you want. And I want to be able to do that. And I want to be able to talk to my car and say, I want the speedometer here, and I want this here. Give me my, my how many miles, of energy I have left. Really create my own experience like that. And I've wanted that for a long, long time.
On a car.
Yeah, on a car in particular. And, I still think that we're a ways away from that. But, I fully anticipate that that's going to be how we interact with a lot of technology, is like, and the new role of designers is curating those interfaces. So like, I will get sort of like what we have now. Like I have the CarPlay version of, my car interface, but now I can have, the Johnny Ives version of a car interface and that I can customize it, versus some other designer's interface of a car interface. And we've built up our software stacks around APIs. And so, Xero's built that way, Upstock is built that way. So there's interoperability built into the system, into the ecosystem. And so then what we're finding, for instance, with some of our platforms like Xero, for instance, people don't even need to go into Xero. Like we're operating Xero headlessly for them, similar to the inventory systems. So, which platform, and it probably is different for different roles. So as an operations person, I'm in Upstock, and so I don't ever touch Xero or, the inventory system or the 3PL or whatever, blah, 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 all through. I just use Upstock as my interface, as my primary, where the accountant in the business will use Xero, and their Xero interface will talk to Upstock and will talk to all these other systems, but their primary interface will be Xero. And, that interoperability, I think right now is still challenging, but I would love to think that, it won't be too far away where we can have the real problem is the accuracy part. Like I literally used ChatGPT the other day, and I'm glad it shows the logic in its equations, because it miscalculated very, very badly in a very simple equation that would have been disastrous if we didn't notice it. So I think that, it's similar to like when mobile, emerged, that we have to find our feet, and it takes a little while for it to, but again, just like mobile became your default interface, like this is my remote to everything in my life. Like it's what talks to the other things.
Yeah.
And so, and I don't think that voice, like Meta glasses, for instance, my son Emery got them and showed me how to use them. And unfortunately, they're not available in New Zealand for some weird reason. And it's really impressive to see, like much more so. Like I remember trying out the Google glasses, and they were just pitiful. And so, and we did actually try the Apple Vision, and that was god awful. But the Meta glasses are really good. And I absolutely, again, it is that, I'm getting, and now they're going to be adding a screen to it. So it'll be this, hybrid of screens and voice, and you'll be like, you're not going to talk about everything out loud. That's, there's certain things you don't want to talk about in certain contexts you don't want to talk in. So there'll still be screens, but the way that designers build them is going to be very different, and the way that users use them is going to be very different. And I think much more control will be in the user's hands than.
Are you still excited about kind of, because Upstock, I mean, it's a very legacy industry, the one you're solving the problems for, right? Hospitality. And I mean, to your point of like, now you're seeing this sort of platform shift with Gen AI and what's possible, and these like kind of wearables with voice that are actually good, right? Not just like Siri that like sucked, but like it's actually good and actually allows you, it actually enables experiences that you didn't enable before, but I'm sure you've thought about even back when you were doing the Beastie Boys stuff, right? So does that, I mean, do you sort of feel like, man, I kind of want to be building some other stuff, or because how do you think about the whole platform shift and you personally and what you're excited about now?
I mean, to me, Upstock is a great platform to actually execute those things, implement those things. Nothing could, there's not much more that's important than the supply chain, than the global supply chain. And we saw that during COVID, right? That really brought the world to its knees and really shook foundations that the entire economy is built on. And so, that's the scale that I'm thinking about it, that again, I'm playing the long game here. And so I think that to introduce those ideas into these platforms, and I don't want to rush into it. I don't want to like prematurely and do goofy shit that is basically gimmicks, and that's a lot of AI is just gimmicks, like bolted on. We're just going to, you can write text in here now. And it's like, yeah, that's garbage text, and I don't need that anyway. And so I think that, for instance, it's obvious and natural that a chef will shout out, here's what I need, just like we do with Alexa, and that's my interface to placing orders. And it is much more of a conversational interface, no doubt about it. But it's still not there yet. It's still, we do have to wait for the technology to be a bit more, refined. And, we have to be part of that process of refining it, pushing.
Do you see Upstock as kind of like a Shopify, but for wholesale? Is that a good way to think about it?
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely one way to look at it, that we are an e-commerce platform, but more so than, in a way, Shopify sort of has a marketplace, but the marketplace for Upstock is really critical, is inseparable from the overall offering.
Mm-hmm.
And so, again, I think that's just kind of both a philosophical difference, but more importantly, a workflow difference about the nature of B2B, which is a repeated, you're repeatedly ordering the same things versus consumer stuff, which is, much more, kind of at a whim and
makes sense.
Much less consistent.
Right. Maybe just to kind of finish off here, any advice for folks trying to build stuff out of New Zealand? What have you enjoyed? What have you not enjoyed? What kinds of companies do you wish to see more of, or what kinds of entrepreneurs do you wish to see more of coming out of New Zealand and Australia?
Yeah, a couple of thoughts just occur to me. Talked to one of the big shot investors from one of the top VC firms in the world who was in New Zealand a few months ago. And, he was saying, New Zealand doesn't have an AI kind of, that I'm only investing in AI and New Zealand doesn't have a culture of AI or, kind of an infrastructure for it. And I think that there is definitely some merit to that. And I think and so it's fucking infuriating that our current government is defunding our technology and education investment. It's madness.
What are they doing, and what would be your maybe quickly policy recommendations? Because maybe some of them would be listening to this.
Yeah, so they're defunding science investment, research investment, which is exactly like this is the space that we're talking about. So if we're not investing in this, then the hell are we investing in? Property and roads. So, I was just in Queensland last year, and the amount of investment they're putting into quantum computing and into AI is astonishing. Massive investment. And they're making big bets and really supporting the ecosystem, really supporting the community. I'm seeing just the opposite here. And that to me is alarming, very, very alarming. And you're seeing kind of the brain drain as a result of that, people going over to Australia because it's just being supported better. Then, in terms of people starting out, like one of my top pieces of advice is to do a startup weekend, for a lot of reasons, to connect with the community, build a network, build experience. Like it is really, really pressure cooker taste of,
like a hackathon? Like a hackathon or something?
It's more than a hackathon, because a startup weekend is that, you are expected to build an actual working product with actual customers with an actual business plan. And I did not realize it. I went with my son Emery to one, and I was like, I'm just, going to be along to be supportive and just kind of take a passive role in this. And I was roped into, it was surprising to me, but in hindsight, it shouldn't have been surprising. They made me the CEO of the business. That was my first taste of like, my son Emery, the designer of the team, was giving me no end of flack. And I was like, this is what Rod must have felt like with me, giving him endless grief. And it's not exactly fun. And so, that getting a taste of what it was like. So for me, that was like, oh yeah, okay, now in the hot seat. And it's a really super compressed, version of a startup. But man, like it's borne out, like, running a startup is, if you can take that weekend and if you come out inspired and energized by that, that's a very, very good sign. If it drains you and you're like freaking out, it's probably a good sign that, you may not want to build a startup. And so it's a good way but it's also a good way to, develop ideas. So Emery then went on to do another startup weekend himself. He's done several of them, and he built a business out of, one of them, that's been very impressively successful. So, that is definitely
what's the business? What's he do?
It's called Road Trip, and it's an app for splitting the funding a road trip. So the gas money or the electricity and planning it. So like, how much is it going to cost? And so it's kind of it spawned out of him being a student, but then businesses really picked it up as well for tracking mileage and getting reimbursed. And then he's got another business now called Kuda Plan that is for teachers. and it's for building lesson plans, and it's all AI based. And so that's going even more, that's what he's been able to build with that is just astonishing. And again, it's a one-man business. And we were talking about like that infrastructure. Like I remember somebody said, it's not going to be far away before the first $1 billion company, a solopreneur, $1 billion company.
Yeah.
And, watching Emery build this, and again, the way it's scaling and the response it's getting is absolutely phenomenal. Wow. And it's multi country. So, this is the New Zealand one. And then there's, for every country, the lesson plan is tailored to the curriculum of that country.
And he built this with AI, I assume, right? A lot of AI in there.
The tooling to do the design, to build the actual platform, the app itself, to the content, like there's nothing in this that is not AI derived.
That's cool. That's awesome.
And yeah, and he's now got another startup that he's involved with, which is a whole other story. But again, it's an AI startup that he's co-founding.
I was going to ask one last final question. I promise, Henrik, I'm sorry. But like, what's like looking back at yourself, like as a kid, kind of seeing the computer in Radio Shack, and then kind of like getting here where like all those things that you had sort of thought of and imagined, they all sort of came to be, right? Like, does that make you optimistic? Do you feel like there's still a long way to go in terms of like creating stuff that you hope exists, or is like, will AI at some point take over and kill us? Kind of like where, kind of having seen that whole journey and experienced it, and what's your perspective on that?
Yeah, I think about that a lot. And there's a couple things, I'd say is that I feel like I was, they talk about digital natives, but in a way I feel like I was the first wave of digital natives, that, I was the first kid to have a computer at home. And so for me, seeing these things, like, I just put two and two together. I was like, music plus computer, or, this plus computer, this, and after Xero, I did struggle. I was like, it's not as like, it feels like everything's been done. There's an app for literally everything. There's nothing that doesn't have an app. And so I felt a little bit dejected, like, if I were going to build another company, like what would it be? And so it is, it's interesting in the world, we're now getting into the kind of the deeper sectors of the kind of the dark corners of, that haven't seen digital transformation yet, and the non-obvious ones. And I think that, AI is going to follow a similar trajectory. So like, the company that my son is now involved with is doing a transcription tool now. Like, so every fucking company has to be a transcription tool, and they will all specialize in, some of them will, find kind of their niche and do well, but, a lot of them are just going to go by the wayside. So, I think it's really exciting in the exploratory days of, and, again, Emery has been my portal into this world, like watching him, how he interacts with AI. I would have never really embraced it the way he does. He's taught me how to use it. And how to think like a native, and how to, just use it as my default tool, rather than like, I have all these defaults wired into my head. Like, these are the tools I use for these problems. And now it's like, no. Starting point is AI. And yes, it's fucked up and broken and gives you terrible, like, there's a lot of things that are not perfect about it, but that is the strength of youth, is like being able to overlook those limitations and to see like, oh, here's where it's going. And in terms of AI taking over, I hope it takes over a lot of things. I hope it takes over a lot. And, I do wonder how lazy it's going to make us as people, like, that we're already used to, for instance, I don't need to know things anymore, right? I just search it. So I don't need to know street names. I don't need to know, like, I literally don't know street names. I know the street I live on, and that's about it. Right. And so, all of a sudden, is that information useful or not? So that's a case where that's not so useful, right? But then there is other information that's useful that we just rely on technology to give us the answers for. And so, I think it's just like all technologies. It's going to, be used for terrible, hideous, horrible things, but it's also going to just open up insanely unimaginable new opportunities that, and I'm not sure that I looked at Emery, like he's in that frame of mind where he's predicting the future much more. He can see it coming more so than I can. So you should ask him that same question.
We'll talk to him next. Great. Well, thank you so much. This was really great.
Thank you for tuning in to TechMates. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with friends. We'll be back soon with more stories of Kiwi and Aussie founders reshaping the future and disrupting down under. Until next time, keep dreaming big and daring to disrupt.